Have you ever spent 26 years loving someone with your whole heart, only to hear them tell you that none of it mattered? The day my daughter looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're not my real family," I felt something inside me break. Not because she wasn't my biological child. I had known that since the day I first held her. But because after everything we had survived together, she suddenly believed blood meant more than love. What she didn't know was that I had kept one secret for over 2 decades. A promise I made to her dying mother. A promise that cost me my own future. And before the story ended, she would discover the truth hidden inside a dusty wooden box that had never been opened. My name is Linda. I'm 56 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I never planned to become a mother. At 29, I was working long shifts as a nurse, renting a tiny apartment and barely paying my bills. Then my younger sister, Emily, called me one rainy evening. Her voice was shaking. "Linda, can you come to the hospital?" By the time I arrived, doctors had already told her the cancer had spread everywhere. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was terrified for the little girl sleeping beside her hospital bed. 2-year-old Sophie. Emily grabbed my hand so tightly it hurt. "If I don't make it, promise me she never feels abandoned." I couldn't even speak. I just nodded while tears rolled down my face. Emily smiled one last time. 3 days later, she was gone. At the funeral, Sophie's biological father never appeared. He had disappeared before she was even born. The state asked if I wanted temporary guardianship. Temporary. That's what they called it. But the moment Sophie wrapped her tiny fingers around mine and whispered, "Don't leave me," I already knew. There was nothing temporary about love. I adopted her 6 months later. From that day forward, she wasn't my niece. She was my daughter. And I promised myself, the first few years after adopting Sophie were the hardest of my life. I wasn't raising a child with a partner. It was just the two of us. During the day, I worked long shifts at the hospital. At night, I rushed home to cook dinner, help with homework, and read bedtime stories before falling asleep on the couch from exhaustion. Money was always tight. There were birthdays when I skipped buying myself new shoes so Sophie could have the bicycle she'd been dreaming about. I never regretted it, not even once. As she grew older, I made sure she knew about her mother, Emily. I kept photo albums, birthday cards, and even a few voice recordings so Sophie would never feel like her mother had been forgotten. Whenever she asked questions, I answered honestly. Your mom loved you with all her heart, and she trusted me to love you after she was gone. Sophie would smile and hug me. I think she chose the right person. Those words healed every sacrifice I'd ever made. By the time she graduated from high school, I couldn't have been prouder. She earned a scholarship to a nearby college and dreamed of becoming an elementary school teacher. I sat in the audience during graduation, clapping until my hands hurt. I thought our biggest challenges were finally behind us. I was wrong. 3 months later, there was a knock on my front door. Standing there was a man I recognized immediately, even though I hadn't seen him in nearly 25 years. David, Sophie's biological father. The man who had disappeared before she was even born. He looked older, tired, and nervous. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I'd like to meet my daughter." My stomach tightened. I wanted to slam the door. But this wasn't my decision to make. It was Sophie's. I had spent 24 years teaching her to choose kindness over anger. Now I had to live by those same words. I took a deep breath and invited him inside. David met Sophie the following weekend. She was nervous. So was he. For the first few minutes, neither of them knew what to say. Then he pulled out an old photograph. It showed him holding Sophie as a newborn. "I've carried this picture for 24 years, he said. Sophie looked at me. I simply nodded. "This is your choice." Over the next few months, David slowly became part of her life. They met for coffee, had long conversations. He told her stories about his side of the family, showed her old family photos, and introduced her to grandparents, cousins, and relatives she had never known existed. At first, I was happy for her. She deserved answers about where she came from, but little by little, something changed. She stopped joining our Friday pizza nights. She canceled our Sunday breakfasts. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd smile, without looking at me. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply whispered, "If that's how you feel, I won't force you to stay." Sophie picked up her bag and walked out the front door. The house became painfully quiet. For the first time in 24 years, there was no laughter, no music, no voice calling. "Mom, I'm home." Every room reminded me of her. The growth marks on the kitchen wall, her graduation photo above the fireplace, the empty chair at the dinner table. A few days later, I decided it was time. I walked into my bedroom and pulled an old wooden box from the back of my closet. It had stayed locked for more than 2 decades. Inside were Emily's letters, her hospital bracelet, family photographs, and one sealed envelope with Sophie's name written on it. I had promised my sister I would give it to Sophie only when she was old enough to understand. Maybe that time had finally come. I called Sophie and asked if she would meet me one last time. She sounded hesitant, but she agreed. When she arrived, I didn't try to defend myself. I simply placed the wooden box on the table. "This belonged to your mother," I said softly, "and it's always been yours." She slowly opened the lid. As her eyes fell on the sealed envelope, the confident expression on her face disappeared. Her hands began to tremble. She carefully broke the seal and started reading the letter her mother had written the week before she died. Sophie's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. For a long moment, she couldn't bring herself to read it. Then, taking a deep breath, she began. "My precious Sophie, if you're reading this, it means I never got the chance to watch you grow into the woman I always imagined." A tear slipped down her cheek. She continued reading. "There's something I need you to know. Your Aunt Linda didn't take you away from me. I asked her to become your mother when I no longer could. She gave up her own dreams so you would never grow up alone." Sophie looked up at me. I quietly shook my head, asking her to keep reading. "If one day you question who your real family is, don't look at your last name or your blood. Look at the person who stayed awake when you were sick, who celebrated your birthdays, who held your hand when you were afraid, and who never stopped choosing you." By now, Sophie's tears were falling onto the paper. At the bottom of the page was one final paragraph. "If your father ever returns, listen to him with kindness. But remember this, my sweet girl, being a parent isn't about coming back one day. It's about never leaving in the first place." The letter slipped from Sophie's hands. She broke down completely. "I'm so sorry," she whispered through sobs. "I let someone who was gone for 24 years make me forget the person who was here every single day." I walked toward her. Without saying a word, I wrapped my arms around her. She cried against my shoulder exactly the way she had when she was a little girl frightened by thunderstorms. "I'm sorry, Mom," she repeated. "I was so busy searching for where I came from that I almost lost the person who made me who I am." I kissed the top of her head. "You found your way home," I whispered. "And that's all that matters." For the first time since David had returned, it finally felt like we were mother and daughter again. Life didn't magically become perfect after that day. Trust takes time to rebuild. But every morning, Sophie chose to stay. Slowly, our old traditions returned. Friday night pizza. Sunday morning coffee on the porch. Long conversations that lasted until the sun went down. One evening, Sophie came home carrying a small gift bag. "I've been waiting for the right time," she said. Inside was a wooden picture frame. There were only 2 photographs. The first was the only picture she had with her biological mother as a baby. The second was a recent picture of the 2 of us laughing in our backyard. Between them was a small engraved plaque. It read, "One gave me life. The other taught me how to live." I couldn't stop the tears. Sophie smiled and held my hands. "I used to think family was something you were born into." She paused. "Now I know it's something someone builds, one act of love at a time." A few months later, she graduated from college. As she walked across the stage to receive her teaching degree, she looked into the crowd until she found me. Instead of waving, she pointed at me and proudly said, "That's my mom." People around me turned and smiled. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about the years of sacrifice or the hurtful words she'd once said. I was simply grateful that love had found its way back. On the drive home, Sophie reached across the car and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." I smiled through my tears. That's what mothers do. Because I finally understood something that no DNA test could ever measure. Blood may create a connection, but love creates a family. Moral: love is proven by actions, not blood.